Hello everyone and welcome back to the Football Forecast. In today's video I'll be ranking every Premier League team's transfer window. I have already done in part A every team from Everton to Arsenal that you can see on that tier list. So if you do want to see where I've ranked those teams, including like Palace, Fulham, Chelsea, those sort of teams, then please check out the previous video and then come back to this one. And if you do enjoy what you're seeing, it would be great if you could like and subscribe to help me grow the channel. Here we are onto the first team, which is Leeds. Leeds have had an alright window is how I'd probably describe this one. I do like the incomings and they haven't let go of a lot, so they've got to give some positives in that sort of area. They've brought in Sean Longstaff, Anton Stach, Okafoa, who will give them some really good pace in behind, Jake Bijlow, who I haven't seen a lot of, and Lucas Perry. Out of those sort of five signings, the main signings, the ones I really like are Longstaff and Stach. Premier League experience, and also Anton Stach, who's an absolute unit, and I think he'll do really well for Leeds. And Okafoa will give them good pace on the width for Leeds. He's obviously also played at AC Milan. He's got good experience. I think that's a really good signing. Looking at some of the other signings they made Sebastian Bournemouth on a free at centre-half. Big unit. I like this sort of approach of signing big players. I think it will work. Leeds have also brought in Calvert-Lewin. If Calvert-Lewin can stay fit, he can score 10, 15 Premier League goals. The issue is that Calvert-Lewin is never fit. Then looking at some of the other signings, they brought in Lucas Nmecha. He has looked decent in the first couple of games, but I do still wonder with Leeds' incomings, could have they done more? Could have they attracted better players? They definitely could have attracted Sunderland level players, and I think Sunderland have brought in some arguably better players. And I think Sunderland have really targeted the market and gone in and really spent money. And that's sort of the benchmark, I think, for these relegation teams. They're not like Burnley where they're really more constrained. And I think people would always pick Sunderland over Burnley. I don't think people would pick Sunderland over Leeds. And for that reason, Leeds are only getting a C because I think they could have shown more ambition. I mean, is Liverpool's window the easiest A of all time? I mean, this is one of the best windows ever in my opinion, and I just think this is an outrageous window from my club. Did I ever expect Liverpool to do this? No. Have we done it? Yes. And how happy am I? Just so happy to see us actually spend this sort of money. Looking at who we had on the outgoings, obviously Trent for 10 million, at least we got a fee. Diaz for 70, Nunes for 50, and Konsa for 35, and Harvey Elliott for a loan with 35. Elliott, I think we could have got more for, but the other three I think are really good on the outgoings. Looking at some of the incomings, I think if we just go through all these players, I think you go every player suits the system and is a top player. Isak tick, Wirtz tick, Ekitike tick, Frimpong tick, Kirki's tick. I've seen a lot of people criticising Frimpong's defensive ability. I think the thing about Frimpong is he'll be able to get up, but also be able to get back, which was one of the weaknesses with Trent, is he was never able to get back. So that should hopefully solve that issue of he shouldn't get caught out because of pace, which is good. I've seen a lot of people saying, why do you need two strikers? Well, what happens if Isak goes down? Then you're looking at Gakpo down the middle, which I've never ever rated. Jadon Danns, who's in the academy. We just needed two strikers, especially after, obviously, Jota passing away, rest in peace. We had to do something. We had to get another 9, and I would have loved Jota to be the backup for one of these two. But obviously, after that happened, I think Liverpool decided we're going to need two great number 9s, and that's what we've done. The only weakness of this window is obviously not getting Marc Guéhi and selling Jarell Quansah, but I think we would have been alright with the 3 centre-halves anyway. Joe Gomez, Konate, Van Dijk, and then Leone is the 4th choice. And as long as we don't pick up 2 injuries, which with Konate and Gomez are pretty injury prone, could happen. But I don't think Marc Guéhi's going to make a huge difference. Because he's not actually going to cover if Van Dijk goes down. I'm still want Marc Guéhi, but if Liverpool were to lose Konate in the summer, we need to sign a centre-half as close as we can to Van Dijk. But I don't want Marc Guéhi ideally to be the replacement for Konate. I want Guéhi to be the 3rd choice, so they're competing for 2nd choice. That's sort of where I see that Marc Guéhi transfer being. So I think what will happen is Liverpool will get Guéhi. I think Guéhi will sign in the summer, either on a pre-contract or in January if we need depth, and then we'll hopefully buy another 1st choice centre-half, which we can use if Konate gets sold, and that's what I want to see from the next summer. I don't think there's a lot to do now for a long time for Liverpool, and for that reason, this window is the most obvious A of all time, and it is the best window this summer. Moving on to Manchester City, and I think this is a decent window, but I'm still not as convinced as others are by this window. On the arrivals, they've obviously brought in Tijani Rangers. I'm giving that a big tick. I think that's given the engine in midfield. When he was at Milan, I rated him very highly, and I think he provides exactly what Man City need in that midfield. Then they'll obviously brought in Ryan Cherokee, who's been injured for 2 months. I'm not going to mark them down for him being injured. Look, he's injured. I think £30 million is a very good deal for Cherokee, and I actually think those two players are actually very much value for money. Donnarumma. I actually think Donnarumma would be a great signing for almost every club apart from maybe Manchester City and Arsenal, where they are really big about keepers using their feet. Donnarumma isn't excellent with his feet. He's decent, but he's not like to a top level. It has improved a bit under Enrique, but I am still a bit worried about that. There's no doubt, though, Donnarumma is a brilliant shot stopper, and if City ever get to penalty shootouts in Champions Leagues, you would almost be stupid to bet against Donnarumma and goal when it comes to those. Raya Ayat-Nouri is a signing I'm actually putting as a cross. I really don't rate Ayat-Nouri as a defensive left back. He's good going forward, but I don't think he's defensively that solid. He's decent. He's decent, but he's not excellent. People are sort of comparing this in Kirkers and going, oh, Ayat-Nouri's the better player than Kirkers. For me, that's people that don't actually watch all Wolves every week and watch clips, because Ayat-Nouri consistently gets caught out at left back, at back post very often, and I think this is going to be a weakness for Manchester City this season, so that's a massive cross for me. James Trafford, I mean, as a backup now, that looks like a very good deal. Once again, I think he could still be the long-term number one. I know they've just brought in Donnarumma, but Trafford's more Pep's sort of keeper, I think, with the sort of ability to play out from the back. And it depends sort of how much does Pep value the ability to pass and sort of be good on the ball to shot stopping. For me, shot stopping is more important. For someone like Pep, it actually might be playing out from the back. So we'll see who starts. I think it will definitely start off, though, with Donnarumma. Looking at their outs, obviously, Vitor Reyes out on loan, Jack Grealish out on loan. This is not because Jack Grealish is a poor player. This is because Pep's misused him and he's not given him enough freedom. Manuel Akanji, I think they could have used someone like this. I really think they could have kept a player like Manuel Akanji. 25 million for McAtee. I do wonder, is this could they just loaned out McAtee? Did they need to sell him? I don't think that's a big fee for a very good player. And Yano Kuto, who was never going to play for Manchester City, for 20 million euros to Borussia Dortmund. So where do I think City could have done something different this window? Straight away, I think they ruined their window in January. I think Kushinov looks like an alright player, and Vitor Reyes looks like a decent player, but they could have used that sort of 80, 90 million pounds to sign the best centre-half on the market. Someone like a Dean Huijsen. Someone like that who instantly improves Manchester City. Zabaini. That's where the money should have gone this summer, in my opinion. They haven't improved their defence enough, and they're going to continue to leak goals. And Pep will continue to lose games sort of 2-1 because he can't keep clean sheets. So it is a little bit of a similar issue at Liverpool, but I do think Liverpool are a better defensive side, and they're actually better going forward than Manchester City. That's my main criticism of Manchester City's window. I don't actually think they've profile players very well. For that reason, I'm actually going to give it a D. I really think this is not a window that puts Manchester City near title contenders, and that is what City's requirement is every year, and that would have been the point of this window, to get them up to title contenders, and they haven't achieved that. So you're under par. Moving on to Manchester United, and I truly believe this is actually the most overrated window of the summer. A lot of people have been praising United for some of their signings, but where have they gone wrong this summer? Well, I don't think they've addressed the correct positions, and that has resulted in balance issues for Manchester United. The players that they brought in are Benjamin Sesko. I do think this is an alright signing. I am being less convinced by him by the day because Amram's just not using him so far. But I do think he's got the right profile to work at Manchester United, but it does feel very Højlund all of a sudden. Looking at the other signings, Bryan Mbeumo, tick. I like the Mbeumo signing, and Cunha, tick. Okay, but where is the problem I have with these two signings? Where does Bruno Fernandes play if these two are playing? And people are going to say, oh, you can play a bit deeper. That's my issue. Bruno Fernandes is not a deeper midfielder. He's better in the 10s, and that's where Bruno Fernandes should be playing for Manchester United. As it stands, Bruno Fernandes is going to play in the midfield. They haven't signed a midfielder, and that is going to cause United real problems. Bruno Fernandes will be at result for a lot of goals Manchester United concede. Look, he may be at result for a lot of goals United score, but he will also be at result for problems. And that's why I really do not like those two signings. I think they could have signed one of them, and then you can use Bruno and further forward. That's what I would have done, and I would have signed Belieber, Adam Wharton, someone like that. And people go, oh, Belieber wasn't on the market. Yes, they just wanted like 100 million. I know it's a big fee, but if you did it early in the summer, they might accept something like 80 million. Look, Belieber might do what we've seen a lot of players do and kick off and try to join. So you definitely could have got this deal, I think, over the line. Brighton are a selling club if you just offer a reasonable fee. And for that reason, that's a criticism. Looking at the other incoming, and it's Lemons on deadline day. Look, they have got a keeper in, but I think this will flop. I am convinced this is going to be one of the flops of the summer. You can't ask a young keeper like this to come in and be first choice keeper for Manchester United. He's coming from Antwerp. Like, it's just not going to work. We've seen this story with United. United need experienced players, especially in goal. I don't rate Emi Martinez hugely because I don't actually think he's a really good keeper. I think he's really overrated by a lot of people because of his World Cup. But Emi Martinez fits Manchester United keeper role like a glove, I think. He really is that sort of got that ego about him, that sort of, he would be huge in goal, he would be a presence, he wouldn't step down from sort of the responsibility of being Manchester United keeper. So I think that would have been the keeper I would have gone with, would have been Emi Martinez. Looking at the departures for United, obviously Rashford out on loan. I mean, the issue is with this one, once again, he's on too high wages, so they could only get a loan deal. But they have got rid of him, and I think that's credit. I think the fact they got 46 million for Garnacho is brilliant. Højlund's obviously getting rid of him, and he's probably off to Napoli. Antony off to Real Betis, Jadon Sancho out on loan. I think that sort of maybe saves the window. I was generally going to go like E. I know this sounds outrageous, but it's the amount of money you've spent, and I'm still not convinced you've actually covered what you needed to do. You still haven't prioritised the keeper and that deeper midfield, which I think were real priorities going into the summer. And considering how much you spent, I think that's important. On the face of it, at the start of the summer, United fans may have gone, oh, this is a great window because we didn't expect to be able to pull Sesko and Mbeumo and Cunha. But we've been proven all summer, United do have pull, which means they definitely could have pulled in a midfielder. So that isn't an excuse in my opinion. The fact you spent this much and the fact you managed to pull those sort of players, to me means that you could have signed a deeper midfielder and still spent the same amount of money if you just didn't buy one of Bryan Mbeumo or Matheus Cunha. For that reason, your window's a D because your midfield's imbalanced and your keeper is too inexperienced, and I don't think it's going to work out. Moving on to Newcastle United, who it's fair to say have a pretty much of a whirlwind transfer summer. Obviously the Alexander Isak saga, and he eventually just ended up going to Liverpool like I think a lot of people expected, and that came with being rejected by lots of clubs. We saw them get rejected by Sesko, Matheus Cunha, Bryan Mbeumo, the list goes on, and that has been Newcastle's problem all summer. They haven't been able to sign many players. Now they have ended up with a decent team, but have they overpaid for a lot of these players? Yes. And do I think they could have maybe got different quality if they just did a bit earlier? Probably. So I would think they needed to sell Isak probably 20 days earlier. And I think Liverpool, if you go to Liverpool and say, look, we want to sell him for sort of 130, 140, Liverpool comes to the table and accept that offer. So you probably get 120, 125. Maybe you get like 10 million less. But I think what has happened with Newcastle is that because they know they're in that situation of panic, oh shit, we've got to find a way past this. We've got to get strikers in. We've got to get players in. And we just need to sort of work this out. They've ended up overspending on a lot of their players. So Walter Made, 85 million. He's probably worth 50 or 60 million, I would say. So I think that's an overpay. Anthony Elanga, I would say, is probably worth about that, maybe 5 million less, but I really rate Anthony Elanga and I think he'll fit Howe's system perfectly, so I'm not going to be hugely critical. Yoane Wissa, probably worth £40 million, he's gone for about 50. Jacob Ramsey, I think that's about fair, and Malak Tior, probably worth 5 million less. So they've probably overspent on quite a few of their players. On the outgoing, Sean Longstaff out for about £10 million and Lloyd Kelly for about £15 million. I mean, Lloyd Kelly for 15 is an absolute rip-off, so they've done really well there. Now, is this a good window for Newcastle? Well, on the face of it, not too bad. But in context of the Isak situation, it probably does take it, that's hinted a bit. But I'm not actually going to put that against the club, because what do you want them to do? Do you want them to just let him rot at the club for all season? That would have financially had a massive burden. And we know that the Isak sort of sale has unlocked sort of 250, 260 million pounds, even though they only sold him for 130. So I don't think that's actually much of a problem. But Newcastle, I don't think have brought in the better quality players that they could have maybe got. And maybe that's because of lack of pull and lack of organisation, which does mark you down. But I also think they've overpaid for a lot of their players because they've had to scramble. So for that reason, I'm going to get a B though still, because I actually think with Eddie Howe, they'll be able to find a way through it, and they'll probably end up still having a decent season. Moving on to Nottingham Forest, who have once again actually shown a lot of ambition this window. And even though everyone seems to have a problem with Marinakis, which I completely understand because he seems like a dick, he does show ambition and he does always do what the club wants first. And I think if he was my owner, I'd actually be very happy with someone like that. Someone that always puts the club first and just doesn't give a shit about the rules. And that has really been summed up with obviously the Morgan Gibbs White situation, but also them being in the Europa League this season. Probably the only owner that would have stopped both of those occurring. And you've got to say, well done. Well done. You've done what's best for your club. And I just think that's good. So on the outgoings, Anthony Elanga for about £55 million. I think this is a good sale. I actually think, as I said earlier, I think this is pretty beneficial to both parties. I think Elanga really suited the system, but don't think he's worth 55, sort of 60, like odd. Danilo, I mean, I think £23 million, that's 23 million euros, sorry, is very good sale. Roman Souza for about 10 million, pretty good. And on Bardi for about 7 million. So I actually think they've raked in about 120 million, which is pretty well done to Nottingham Forest, considering I think those players altogether are probably worth about 80, maybe 90. So well done to Nottingham Forest. And this has allowed them to spend Omari Hutchinson, definitely not worth what they paid. He's worth probably about 15, 20. So that's a massive overpay. And that already makes the window look not so great. Dan Ndoye, though, I think is an excellent signing for about £35 million. Great signing. This other right winger from Strasbourg, never heard of, but they do already have a couple of right players that can play off the right, so I do sort of question that one. Kalamadu for about 25. I'm pretty sure I've seen it. I've seen a bit of him, and I think he's a decent player. Douglas Luiz, great signing. This is excellent. This is like top draw signing for just a loan fee for someone that was so good in the Prem. I know it hasn't worked out for him, but I think this is a very good signing. Then looking at some of the other signings that aren't included here, they've signed James McAtee. This is a lot better than the Hutchinson signing, and I would probably rate this as a very top signing. Igor Jesus and Jar Cunha from Botafogo. We saw how impressive they were at the Club World Cup in a very similar system, and I once again like those signings. So what I sort of see is I see a couple of maybe misses and more hits. And for that reason, I've given it a B. I think it's a very good window for Nottingham Forest, and once again, they've shown great ambition. Moving on to Sunderland, and I've just got to say, first of all, well done on Sunderland for actually showing a lot of ambition this summer and trying to stay in this division. That is what I exactly see with Sunderland's window. It may not work out, but at least they've given it a very good go. On the departures, they've obviously sold Joe Bellingham for about 30 million euros. I think if he's not called Bellingham and he's called like, I don't know, Smith, he probably goes for about £15 million. So, and then they've also got Tommy Watson on the outgoing to Brighton. It was never, these two players and Perry Ickworth were never going to be part of the squad to keep them in the league. So I think they're all very good sales, and they're also pure profit. So that allows for them to bring in lots of players within keeping in PSR. And that's what they've done. They brought in Habi Diarra from Strasbourg. I've really liked what I've seen from him so far. Simon Adingra, what a player Simon Adingra is. I mean, I know he wasn't really going to work at Brighton, but I think that pace on the counter will cause teams a real problem. And that's what you need in teams coming up, in my opinion. Enzo Laffi, another good midfielder from Roma, obviously played part in Sunderland last year, coming in on loan and showed his quality, even though it maybe wasn't as good as people were actually hoping for, and I actually think he could probably play better in the Prem this year. Brian Brobby, I knew he was a big talent at Ajax. Let's see how he goes. And same with Talaby from Club Brugge. Once again, haven't seen a lot of them. I think there's a bit of mystery with Sunderland's players, but the one thing you can say is you can't deny they've had a real go. They've also brought in Granit Xhaka, which I think is one of the signings of the summer. I really do. I think it's arguably in like the top 10 signings. If it keeps Sunderland up, he will go down as a top 10 signing for sure. The experience, the know-how, just everything about the Granit Xhaka signing to me is a great signing for a team looking to stay up in the league. And then their other signing is Geertruida. That's the other one I really want to highlight because he's an excellent right back. I can't believe he's ended up on loan at Sunderland on the final day. I think that's a brilliant signing for Sunderland. And for this reason, and mainly for the ambition, I'm giving it an A. Because what more do you expect from Sunderland to do? And this is what I wanted to see from a club like Leeds. I wanted them to show the ambition that I think Sunderland have shown this summer. Moving on to Spurs, and I think if we were doing this a week ago, this conversation would be very different. But I'm just going to have a look at some of the signings they made just at the start, and that was with Mohamed Kudus for a fee of 55 million. I did doubt this a little bit, but now I'm starting to see how this is going to work, and I think this is a brilliant signing. Then obviously João Palhinha for just a loan fee. I mean, this is brilliant. This is exactly what Spurs were missing. Just a destroyer in their midfield. And if Højbjerg, who they actually sold, could have done this for them last year, I think Spurs would have actually finished a lot higher up the league. So I'm giving a massive tick to the signing of João Palhinha, and obviously letting go of Heung-min Son as well for £20 million. I mean, Son is very big for experience, but how much was he actually going to give them on the pitch this season on his big wages? Not a lot, so I think this is a good sale, really. And Mikey Moore going on loan to Rangers. He's a real talent. Look at some of their incomings. Obviously, look at the other incomings. They got Xavi Simons for 65 million. I think this is a top signing, really do. And I actually think he's almost on the level of Eze, if not better. And he's a lot younger, and he will have value to sell if Spurs ever need to sell him. And also, I think a signing that's actually a very good backup, Randall Colomwani, who was not available for absolutely ages. And then Spurs went in and got him in on loan on the final day, nicking him from Juventus, who could just never agree a deal. But I actually think, I look at this deal and I go, who could have maybe used a striker like this? I think you could look at Manchester United. They could have used a backup 9 on the final day, just on loan. I look at Arsenal. What happens if Gyökeres goes down? You don't have a 9 because Havertz is injured. So I think Colomwani is a very good deal for a lot of clubs. Even Newcastle, if you didn't want to spend all that money on Wissa, then you could have just got Mawani on loan on the final day, which may have just been as good. So I think this is a very good window for Spurs, and this is going to be another A, and that will be going to top. Moving on to West Ham, and this is a very interesting summer to discuss. But first of all, just having a look at some of their outgoings. Kudus for about £55 million. Now, as much as I just said he's a brilliant signing for Spurs, Kudus was showing a lack of attitude and lack of effort towards West Ham, so I think they were better off selling him. I don't think there was any point keeping a player like that, so I'm not going to mark that down. Edson Alvarez out on loan for a couple of million, and then Aguerd for 20 million. I think that's a very good fee for Aguerd, actually. And in their incomings, they've brought in Mateus Fernandes for €44 million. I think this is a good signing, really good signing for West Ham, and it really did address the issue that they had. Jean-Claire Todibo, I mean, just don't know about this guy. Like, he plays all right, and then another game he just looks shit. And he really didn't look great for West Ham at parts. But anyway, Al Hadji Malik Diouf, and I think this is their best signing by an absolute mile. Looks like a real talented left back, and he'll be leaving West Ham very soon, I reckon. Mads Hermansen, I mean, based off the first 2 games, you would say this is a shocking signing, but I do still think this will work out all right. Hermansen, we know, is a good keeper from what we saw at Leicester, and then Igor on loan on the final day. I mean, apart from really nicking him from Crystal Palace, I don't really get the point of this. Like, he's just a decent centre-half and a back three, I guess. And then they've also brought in a young French centre-half, and I like that, just sort of trying to bring in some youth to the squad and just try to do that sort of approach that I think West Ham really need to do. They also, this is sort of non-transfer, but a little bit, they've also kept Graham Potter. I know he's just come off a 3-0 win against Forest, but I think that's probably the worst business of the summer. But I'm going to exclude that because this is in the transfers for players. I am, however, going to still give this a D. I like some of their signings, but I think they could have shown more, and they just need to sort of have a better approach in the summer, more of a approach that shows where they actually want to head towards, because it just feels very gun-ho, in my opinion. Moving on to the final club in Part B of the tier list, and that is Wolverhampton Wanderers. Wolverhampton Wanderers have had, once again, a very strange summer. It's very Wolves, lots of departures, and not that convinced by the incomings. Matheus Cunha, like that. Obviously, I just think you got to sell him. Like, £65 million, it is what it is. He kept you up, and I just think it's all right. Matheus Cunha, you can't keep him, and once again, no criticism on Wolves. And that's the same with the Aït-Nouri deal. When Manchester City and Man United come in for a Wolves player, they obviously want to go, and I just think, fair enough. Like, what can you do? Fabio Silva also sold. I mean, he's shit. How they got £20 million for him? And they've done very well there. And Guedes for $4 million. Once again, I think they've done quite well because he's been pretty rubbish. Looking at sort of their incomings, Jorgen Strand Larsen came in last summer, but what they did do is they kept hold of him, even though it says this summer because it was a mandatory future fee because he was in on loan, but they did keep Jorgen Strand Larsen, so well done. I can't really comment on that striker, Tulo Akadura. I haven't really seen him play. Fer Lopez, same. I've seen a little bit of him, but he's not he's been all right. John Arias, though, I saw a lot of actually at the Club World Cup, and I think he's a real player. But once again, with Wolves, this is just the most common thing they do every summer. They build a squad where you're like, why have they done that? They haven't really replaced the players. It's not good enough. And then they just save it in January every year. And I've just hoped that Vitor Pereira doesn't get sacked because I don't think he deserves it. I think Vitor Pereira came in and did a great job for Wolves, and they just need to back him a bit more than this. I don't think there's any problem with the sales. It's just, could have they spent more and less and more on sort of just, I guess, maybe better players. Like, I don't think any of these players are really going to set the light off, apart from maybe that John Arias. They also actually, just a note, they loaned out Tommy Doyle, which I thought was very strange because I think they need that sort of depth in midfield, and now they do sort of lack depth in their midfield if an injury happens to someone like João Gomez. That could cause Wolves some problems. So at the end of the day, I'm still going to give them a D because I just think they've made decent sales, and John Arias has sort of boosted it. And the fact they kept Strand Larsen probably just keeps us in a pretty lucky D. Here is the tier list for this video. If you want to check out where I place the other 10 teams, then please watch the first video. This will be the end of this video. Please let me know where you think I've done well, where I could improve, but also let me know where you think I've placed the teams. Who have I placed too high? Who have I placed too low? And if you did enjoy the content, it would be great if you could like this video and subscribe to help me grow the channel. Anyway, goodbye and thank you for watching.